Good evening, everyone. You're watching Vintage Motocross Q&A. I'm your host, Joe Abadi. Tonight, we have a special segment. We're going to be doing an interview with Chris Carter. We'll have Chris Carter on in just a moment. But as always, if you are on YouTube or Facebook, I would like you to continue to share the show. Share the show, and tomorrow we will announce who the winner is of this beautiful sticker sheet, compliments of Vmxq&A. Keep sharing the show. And if you're on YouTube, comment Motion Pro. Share the show, and the best way to watch the show is on your big screen TV. I talk about that just about every week. Watch it on your big screen TV, and you can comment from your phone. That's how the experts, that's how the pros are watching the show. Of course, I want to thank our sponsors, Motion Pro, Vmxq, Racer X Magazine, Tiny's Transportation, Northwest Mako CZ, Preston Petty Products, Full Circle Racing, and the International Motocross Museum. My guest tonight is an International Six-Day Trials gold medal winner. He's also the founder of Motion Pro, and now he is a published author with a new book that has just been recently released. And my guest is Chris Carter.
Joe.
Chris, thanks for joining me tonight.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for the invite. Looking forward to it, Joe.
It should be really, really a lot of fun. We've got this book here, Chris, this amazing book. It's hard to pick up, Chris. It's like 7.5 pounds, this book.
Right. Well, we spare no expense.
There it is. When Honda Went Dirt Track Racing. Absolutely an incredible book. I've been going through it bit by bit. And I guess the first thing I want to talk to you, Chris, is about not so much how you put the book together, but what the book is about. It is about a very, very special bike that Honda began to make when they wanted to go dirt track racing. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that Honda, and then we'll take it a little further from there. What's with the bike that's in the book?
Well, there's several bikes in the book, but the model that's really focused on is the RS750, which was built by Honda to go after Harley Davidson's stranglehold on dirt track. You know, other manufacturers try things over the years, and the period that this book really covers is in the early 80s through 1990. Honda was officially involved for about 5 years in this program. And this is one of the only programs that Honda got involved in that was truly done just for the American market and with American engineers and riders right from the start. Granted,
Okay.
Japan helped, but it was really a function of the U.S. importer to run the program.
Okay. So as you mentioned, Harley Davidson did have the stronghold, so to speak, on dirt track racing. I mean, way back from the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. And there were some companies that did try and get into that competition. Can you name a few of those? I think of Triumph and BSA off the top. But who else?
Yeah, those are big players. But, you know, it depends on how far you want to go back. We can go back to the 40s and it was in 30s. It was Indian and Harley Davidson. And, you know, dirt track racing really evolved from board track back in the turn of the century, and it evolved into dirt track in the 20s, and it's been going on ever since. You know, really, dirt track racing has its roots here in the United States, and it's unique to the U.S. market. Sure, it is done other parts of the world, but not to the extent that people participate here in the U.S.
So when did Honda decide that they were going to go after Harley and the dirt track titles gung-ho? They really came on strong in like the early 80s, but was the project beginning to get some traction, so to speak, in the late 70s, 80, 81?
Well, a lot of Honda dealers were racing Hondas single cylinders and twins prior to the RS coming out, and people doing, you know, backyard development with Hondas. Honda dealers love to race, and so, you know, the XR and XL 350s and so on back in the day were popular, and of course, several different companies are making frames for flat track and using Honda power products, Honda motors. But it really got started in the early 80s. A real enthusiast for dirt track, Jerry Griffith, put a program together with Honda's help to develop a twin cylinder to compete against the Harley Davidsons. And that started in about 1982.
So while I was doing the research on this, Chris, I follow motocross a lot. That's always been my passion, and I know it's yours in a lot of ways too. But it made me think about it's AMA flat track, and there was a production rule for the motocrossers around 1985. Did that play a factor into the game with the RS 750, the production rule?
Well, um, Class C, what AMA called Class C racing is what this type of form of racing is, started out to be,
Okay.
which was originally production bike built bikes, or bikes had to be homologated. Like, let's say pick a number like 200 if you were going to build a racing model only, it had to be available to general public, and they had to build so many to make available to the public. When Harley
Okay.
Davidson when Harley Davidson came out with their XR 750, which is in 1970. That replaced a model which was called a KR, which had been around for a lot of years prior to 1970. They saw it as being outdated, and over the years, there have been a lot of rule changes and things happened with dirt track to try to level the playing field. If you had a flathead style motor back, which is pretty traditional in the 50s and 60s, um,
Hmm.
Triumph and BSA and some of the other manufacturers had overhead valve. Well, they were limited in CCs. They could only run 500 CCs, where Harleys, because they're flatheads, could run 750 CCs. The basic rule: twin cylinder, four stroke, um, twin cylinder, four stroke engines. Now, that the rules over the years have changed. For a while, and you remember the motto, or I should say the saying that Kenny Roberts said when they were experimenting, they couldn't get any more out of their 750 production bike, which is the uh, XR, excuse me, RS. Let me back up. Had too many models. The XS6 650, which they could board a 750 and
Right.
use for dirt track. Well, they couldn't compete with the Harleys and even some of the Triumphs and so on. So they took their four-cylinder road race engine and adapted that to racing, and and it was outlawed, and they changed the rules so they could only be twin-cylinder bikes. So there's a lot of experimentation with flat track over the years. But it really settled down in the 80s where they had to be twin cylinder, uh, traditionally four stroke, and 750 maximum cc's.
Okay. So, Honda did go through a period with the bike where they went from a 500 to a 650 to a 750. Was that just a natural progression over the years as the bike was getting faster and they just wanted to build a bigger motor? Or tell me a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, Jerry Griffith, as I mentioned earlier, was really the 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 base for this whole project getting started. He was the one that really pioneered it. And at the time, Honda made a street bike called a CX500, uh,
Yes.
and that motor was a V, but at a 45-degree angle, and it was like the old Moto Guzzi's, a cylinders for each side. It wasn't a traditional V front to rear design, and so he adapted that because that's all Honda really had, and he started with 500. Then they made some different barrels, and that bike originally did a lot of engineering. That bike originally was a shaft drive,
Yeah.
500 cc, water cooled, and you could water cool the bikes. They didn't have to be air cooled. Water cooling is just really coming on in the early 80s, as it was in motocross. So he adapted that engine with a lot of help from Honda, but he did so much stuff on his own, and that was basically a test bed. And they had to build 25 kits because it's a production-based engine. They built thousands and thousands of the CX500s. Honda had to build 25 kits to make them available, so a privateer could buy one of these kits that Jerry helped develop, so they could race Class C racing in something larger than a 600 cc. So they made
So
these
20
750
of
kits.
those engines were built and given to and sold to privateers?
They Honda built basically six bikes and made 25 kits available for privateers, but no one was buying them because they haven't really been tested yet. They didn't go out. They didn't have success right away. For two
Okay.
years, 2 years they fiddled with it, and finally in 1982, Scott Pearson was able to win a national at Louisville, and that was the only race that they were successful in with the what model was called an NS 750, which is basically a CX 500 motor, and of course special frames were built. So privateers didn't get involved with those because they hadn't had much success with it. If it had been different, if they'd come out of the box with that and they started winning everything, but
Mhm.
there's too much engineering or too much work independent would have to do to build one. So, and about that time, um, Honda and the folks that are running this program, Gene Romero and Jerry Griffith. Honda hired Gene Romero because they got serious about flat track. And Gene was a Grand National champion from, if you watch him move on any Sunday, he was the
Sure.
one that's crowned national champion in that movie in 1971. 19,
Hmm.
and so um, he had retired by the early 80s, and Honda saw an opportunity to hire Gene to help oversee the program with Jerry. And so that's when they really got serious. And on a trip to Japan, they found this V twin motor that was in production that they used for Dakar rallies and some other events. And so that's what they decided to go with and abandon the CX 500 motor, the NS motor, because it's just too much work to adapt it for flat track. So they started on I think 83 on developing that engine, and they came out with 200 or 50 kits, 50 motors that the public could buy in 1984, and that's what got it started. In fact, a local guy here in Northern California got one of the first engines, um, and that's what his name was Alex Jorgensen. Um,
Oh yeah, sure.
Georgie, and from Stockton. So he was one of the first privateers to get an engine. And prior to that, he had raced Nortons and Triumphs and everything else. But he decided he wanted to try the Honda, and so those engines were available to the general public. You could buy one, and I think the price at the time in 1984 was $8,500. Now you could buy a Harley engine for about the same amount of money, but you'd have to put it all together. All the parts came to you in a box if you bought an XR engine, where the Honda engine came to you all assembled, ready to be bolted into a chassis.
And
So,
Chris, that was for just the engine, not the frame,
right,
nothing else?
right, right, right. So you probably had a 15 or $20,000 investment to go dirt track racing as a privateer with a Honda in the early 80s, mid 80s.
No, I know you got a large collection of bikes, Chris. Do you have an RS 750 in your collection? I bet you have at least one.
Actually, I'm very fortunate. I got on these bikes before, and when I started my company in 1984, and that's about the
Hmm.
same time Honda really got serious about this, and that's when they had their first full team of three riders with the RS 750. That was Doug Chandler, Bubba Schobert, and Ricky Graham.
Hmm.
And I've always been involved in flat track and interested in flat track back from starting in being involved in motorcycles since about 1968. Here growing up here in the Bay Area, I'd go to Sacramento, go to San Jose whenever they had flat track races, and the shop I worked at starting out was heavily involved with flat track. So I've always been around it. I didn't do much flat track racing myself, but it's just to me it's just the ultimate racing is especially a mile race to watch. And
Okay.
so that's to answer your question, yes, Joe, I'm very fortunate. I have one of Bubba Shore's R750 factory bikes and also one of Doug Chandler's. In fact, Doug's bike won 5 uh, Ascot half mile nationals during his career on that bike. And I also have one of the 6 factory NS750s. And I mentioned Scott Pearson earlier. I have his bike that he won Louisville on. So I started collecting these bikes years and years ago, and just love the technology, love what Honda did. You know, to go against Harley Davidson. There's nothing wrong with Harley, but I thought it was great to see somebody else go after Harley.
Sure. Hey, Chris, did you have to restore those bikes? Did you have to look for parts for them, or were they fairly complete when you got them?
The bike that I purchased from it's a long involved story, but basically I purchased the Bubba Schobert bike complete as his last race and Bubba's last race from his mechanic. When Honda disbanded their factory effort, Skip Eakin, who was Bubba's mechanic, part of his severance, was one of Bubba's bikes, and that's the bike I ended up with. So I have Bubba's bike that his mechanic Skip Eakin left the factory with, and after about 10 years of him having it, I was able to buy it in the late 90s. And the
Hmm.
Doug Chandler bike came to me a roundabout way, a similar situation. Uh, Actually, a year or so before I got the Schobert bike, and just happened to fall into the NS 750 about the same time. So I had to turn my piggy bankings inside out to get those bikes. So
Yeah. And do you see these bikes for sale at any time, Chris? Have you seen them at the Mecum auction over the years? And what are they trading for if you see them?
there 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 was one at the Mecum auction a few years ago. It did make reserve. It had been beat up quite a bit. Real factory bikes. There's really only 6 real factory bikes. 2 went
Uh-huh.
to each of riders, and of course, a lot of frames, a lot of parts, a lot of engine cases, different things around. Honda built, I think, 3 runs of motors, so about at least 200 motors were or components were built uh, to satisfy all the independents that were riding the bikes besides the factory riders, which are only 3 at the time, 3 factory riders. Um, and But prior to those 3 riders who I named, Honda worked with Terry Poovey, um, Hank Scott, and just a number of other riders over the years that did ride those bikes. Alex Jorgensen, who I mentioned. So a lot of independent riders were able to ride basically the same bike the factory had, and
Okay.
a little different than motocross. These truly the bikes that the factory had were really basically the same bike that independent could buy.
So what do they cost about if someone were to find one for sale, or if you have seen one for sale, what is usually the price range of those bikes?
Depends if 2 guys wanted it.
I'm sorry?
So it depends if 2 people really wanted it and you
I
had a
see.
bidding war. So
Okay.
as you've experienced at the Mecum auction, but I would think the going price now, if you can find one that has some type of provenance, 70 to $150,000.
Okay. Well, now we know in case we see one. Hey, Chris, we're going to take a little break. We're going to hear from our sponsor, Vintco, and then we'll
Great.
be back with more of Chris Carter and actually getting into how this book was made. We will be right back with Chris Carter.
Vmxq, who already has a full line of vintage parts, now has air shocks that are an exact duplicate of the original air shocks so popular in the late 70s. So whether you're looking to build a full racer or museum showpiece, these shocks will give you that incredible 70s look and improve your bike's performance. These new air shocks are fully rebuildable with Vmxq rebuild kits, and all shocks are hand assembled in the USA with all new components. Every component is brand new. Just like the originals, our air shocks are adjustable with 2 chambers, high and low pressure, giving you tremendous flexibility for settings of your bike suspension. The Vmxq air shocks come fully assembled and ready for installation. Just add air or nitrogen. The kits include the manual and spacers. Visit Vmxq.com to check out the air shocks and all that Vmxq has to offer to help you get back on track and to keep that ride going.
All right, we're back with Chris Carter, founder of Motion Pro and author of the new book, When Honda Went Dirt Tracking. We were talking about the RS 750, the rarity of that bike, some of the people who rode it when it was in its early production stages. But now I really want to get a little bit more, Chris, if we can, into the book itself. Okay? The cover of the book, it is absolutely beautiful. And here it is once again. I want to show it to everyone, When Honda Went Dirt Tracking. And on there it says Jerry Foster and Chris Carter. So tell me a little bit how or who Jerry Foster is and how you got involved with him and how you guys decided to collaborate on this book.
Well, it's actually by chance, Joe. This book was about a 8 year project. And in
Hmm.
2013, Gerald and I happened to both be back at the National Motorcycle Museum in Anamosa, Iowa. They're having a show featuring dirt track bikes. They had asked me if John Parham, who has left this earth, and what a great guy he was, who started that museum, he and his wife Jill, And if you're ever in Anamosa, it's a great museum. They have all kinds of great motorcycles there. It's John, a little background on him. He started J&P Cycle and built that up to a very reputable, large company. But his passion is really old motorcycles and motorcycle history. And he and his wife started this museum not too far from the original J&P Cycle. Anyway, they would have rotating displays and exhibits and run them for 6 months to a year or whatever. And they decided to do it on dirt track. So they contacted me because I knew I had Bubba Shobert's Honda and asked if I would lend it to the museum for a year. And on one stipulation, when you have the grand opening, if you'd pay for Bubba Shobert to be there with the bike,
Okay.
which they did. And so Bubba and I were there along with um, Jay Springsteen, uh, Chris Carr, Bill Warner, who is a famous tuner for on Harley Davidsons, and we're all staying in the same hotel, very close to the museum, and we're there for about 3 days. And one evening we were talking, and Gerald was there. I met him for the first time, and I knew about Gerald because, and I thought you might ask me this. Gerald wrote a book in 1978 on flat track. Now,
Okay.
Gerald immigrated from England in the mid early 70s, and he'd worked for different manufacturers in England, I think Triumph and BSA, and eventually, and I'm not sure when exactly, he got a job with Honda. So he worked for Honda for a lot of years, and he was semi-retired when I met him in 2013, and he'd written some other books and things. So we just had me sitting around having a few cocktails, and we started talking about Honda and dirt track, and it just kind of all fell together. And another fellow that was there, um, who's in the publishing business, Tim Parker, had Parker Press, and had written quite published and worked with facilitating people to write books in motorsports. He's very involved in the Bottoms auction. He knows a lot of the Italian motorcycles very well. He happened to be there. So the three of us kind of partnered and we started talking about it. And if after a few more conversations over the next few weeks, we decided this would be a great project to do the Honda book.
Hmm.
So that's how it started.
And,
Because
and you
sorry,
said it took you how many years, Chris, from that night of having a conversation until you actually got a book? How many
over
years?
over 7 years, and I
7 years.
didn't Joe, and I didn't know if we'd ever finish it, Joe. Well, I thought maybe one of us would die. We interviewed 50 plus people, and the
Yeah.
problem with doing that many interviews, um, you you would do an interview, track the person down, and we had some folks that we would contact who would never even give us a time of day. We could never get them to respond at being interviewed for whatever reason. People that rode Hondas or had something to do with that we tracked down. In doing interviews, we find about you should talk to this guy or that guy or whatever. There's when you get into the book, you'll see there's bios on just about everybody in there.
Yes.
There's some things that I didn't know when we were writing the book. We did an interview with um, Jim Dewar, who has Mega Cycle Cams. It happens to be here in the Bay Area, San Rafael. Well, I didn't know he raced cars. I knew he was a ex-flat track racer. Jim's now in his 80s, and he still has his business, Mega Cycle Cams. Well, he did on this particular Honda project. He did a lot of work for Honda engineering on the cams and different things, and so he was a big part of it. But I didn't know his backstory. He was a good
Mm.
friend of Dick Mann's. Did a lot of work with Dick Mann, and so we interviewed Mert Lawo, even though he was never involved in the RS750 program. When Honda started doing well, the powers that be thought they were winning too many races, so they restricted the Hondas and changed some different things. Well, Mert Lawo was involved in making restrictor plates uh, to try to slow the Hondas down.
Mhm.
The AMA said it wasn't to try to make it more an even playing field, but that really was the reason, in my opinion. Um, because Honda was doing so well. But Honda put a lot of energy into it. They basically took a 50-year-old design of the Honda XR and retooled it and brought it up to modern standards. It had 4 valves per cylinder versus 2, uh, just so many different things. Excuse me. So, but getting back, the reason I did this book is it's based so much on guys here in Northern California. They're involved because I own some of these bikes, and I just thought as a short time of racing history is that it didn't go on for 50 years. That flat tracks is going on for close to 100 years, but
Sure.
Honda involvement is pretty short lived, and they might still be doing it if it hadn't have been for certain obstacles that are put in their way politically through the sanctioning body and so on over the years.
Yeah.
So
One of the things I absolutely loved about the book, Chris, is how you do the interview and then you follow up with different pictures and information on the race. How you interviewed one person and then you follow up with these great pictures, many of them never before seen. I know some of them have come out of personal collections. They've never been in magazines or in any newspapers at all. But it was the layout of the book that I really, really liked. Was that your idea, or was that Gerald's idea? Whose idea was it to lay the book out like that?
I think Gerald had a lot to do. We all worked together, but Gerald, I have to give a lot of credit to Gerald for sticking with this program. And we're chasing people down, getting them the interview, and the book just kind of developed as we started putting it together. Actually, it's 540 pages, but we have about another 200 pages that we just couldn't justify putting in the book. Gather all
Wow.
this information. But you can go to Motion Pro's website, and there's a link there that you can see. A lot of these things might be race results or different things, but we just couldn't justify putting in the book. We couldn't afford to ship the thing, let alone print it. And it's a relatively expensive book, but to tell you the truth, I'm not making any money on this thing. I printed 1,000 copies. When they're gone, they're gone. I've talked to other folks who in the publishing business. I wasn't going to go crazy, and didn't try to make a lot of money out of this. I just try to get it out there. I think it's an important part of racing history. And with your folks watching the show, I know their background. A lot of them really like motocross, and there's some motocross involvement in there. Dave Arnold, who was real involved with Honda's program, worked on some suspension, and he's interviewed in the book. There's a lot, and we interviewed back in the day when Camel was a big sponsor. We tracked down a lot of the Camel girls who would present the trophies, and
Sure.
also the different promoters. Like they had a section of Stroh's beer did a series of races, and so the fellow put that together was Peter Starr. So we interviewed him. A lot of backstories. It's not just the R750s, but it's really the heyday of flat track when the first time guys are really making big money because of Camel and factory involvement. It's just too bad that maybe Yamaha and Kawasaki didn't come on board and try to go after and be as competitive as Honda, but it didn't happen.
Sure.
Um, so
Well, speaking of the board behind me, it's a good time to tell people to get over to Preston Petty Products, PrestonPetty.com. Whether it's your grips, number plates, of course, fenders that we've been using for over 50 years now, get over to PrestonPettyProducts.com. Chris, the interviews that were performed with 60 different people, did you personally do some of those interviews, or was it done via a Zoom meeting or emails? How were many of those interviews conducted?
out of those interviews, we did a lot by phone and phone interviews, or we go visit people. We would, Gerard and I go someplace to see somebody, meet them, just do whatever it took to try to track them down. We would write it up. When I say we, Gerald would write it up. We'd send it back to them. Hopefully they would respond to our draft and make any changes. And some of the interviews got a little lengthy, but that's just the way it is. We tried to give everyone as much time as we felt we could in the book to, and there's things there about some collectors who have these bikes, why they collected their bikes. A lot of side stories on things about guys who work with the different riders, who travel with the riders. So many different aspects of the flat track fraternity and so
Yeah.
on. So
And Chris, you just mentioned about some motocross people being involved in the book, one of them being Dave Arnold. I read some reviews on this book, and it's just like every other movie review. You can listen to one person and they rave about it, and another one who says, well, it wasn't really that good, which is, I don't know, I guess that's what critics have to do. That's what gives them a job. But one was actually saying that he was a little disappointed in all the information about why Dave Arnold was there, and he has a question mark as if, who is Dave Arnold? And then he was also a little disappointed that some of the book went into Ricky Graham's personal life. And there were a couple of other things too that the critic was like, well, there was no need for us all to know that. When I look at it, those are the things I really want to know about, Chris, because those aren't stories and facts that you're going to read just anywhere. So I would like to know who Dave Arnold is, and I would like to know, I mean, it's unfortunate, but I would like to know a little bit more about Ricky Graham and some of the battles that he had personally, because he was such a phenomenal writer. So I really have to take my hat off to you on that, and whoever put that in there, whether it was you or Gerald. I thought it was and there's 2 or 3 other, in fact, there's 4 or 5 other stories in there that I won't get into here because I don't want to spoil it for the readers, and I do want them to get your book. But there are some very, very interesting personal stories in this book as well. It's not all about carburetors and wheels and motorcycles. So,
Well, and Joe, if I just mention on Ricky Graham, Ricky Graham was a friend of mine, a personal friend.
yes.
And one of the folks we interviewed in the book was Danny Malfatti, who really helped Ricky keep it together. If it
Mhm.
wasn't for Johnny Goad, who's in the book, Ricky wouldn't have had a second chance, a third chance. He would have, but he was so talented. He had some demons, but he was so talented. And he wasn't with us. He had already passed when we wrote this book. But
Yeah.
this book is really dedicated to guys like Ricky Graham. And there, whenever I go to Springfield, and I've been several times since I watched Ricky there back in the 80s and 90s, it gives me goosebumps because there's nothing like watching Ricky Graham go around the Springfield Mile.
Yeah.
He could ride the wheels off of anything. And so this was a personal project for me in that I wanted to get the story out there of these guys, what they do for flat track, because their careers will be short-lived.
Yeah.
And
And Chris, you mentioned something before. I'd like you to repeat it if possible. There was so much information in this book. You had to cut some of it off, but you are making it available at the Motion Pro website?
yeah, these books are only available through Motion Pro.
Okay.
We don't have enough margin to sell them through Amazon or through dealers. There's this one price. You can go right to Motion Pro's website and order the book. They'll send it out to you. And yeah, it's it was a long deal. Really, it took a lot of time, but I'm glad we finished it, and it's really rewarding. I just we want to tell the story, and I don't think it Gerald was the right guy to help with this project, and Tim Parker helping us guide us along the way, and just for me, having to know a lot of these guys over the years and being around this for well over 50 years myself, they probably did some personal favors by interviewing or taking the time to spend with us
Right.
doing this thing. But no, I get comments all the time from folks who are in the book or get the book. It's just it's very rewarding, and so I'm very pleased the way it came out, and I'm not sure what more I can tell you about it.
Chris, we're going to take a commercial break, and then we'll be coming back with Chris Carter, and we'll wrap up for tonight. We'll be right back.
Hi, Jeff here, introducing you to Motion Pro's magnetic pickup tool today. Now, we've all had that bad experience where we drop a loose part or fastener into a hard to reach place like a skid plate or belly pan. Well, this is the right tool for the job that will retrieve that stubborn part and get you back to working on your ride. As for the features of the magnetic pickup tool, first you have this billet aluminum handle. There's a low profile magnetic tip that's extremely strong and in fact will even pick up a Motion Pro T handle. This flexible shaft can get into hard to reach places and with its protective coating won't damage the finish on your motorcycle. The magnetic pickup tool is affordably priced at $14.99 and is available from your favorite power sports dealer nationwide. So avoid future frustration and pick one up for yourself today.
Okay, we're back. And my guest tonight is Chris Carter. We are talking about the wonderful book that he has recently released. And when Honda went dirt track racing. Forgive me. When Honda went dirt track racing. Chris, 560 pages in this book, 700 pictures. Any problems with copyrights? Were people just more than happy to give you the pictures and let you go with them? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, that we had to work on that. You had permission to use a lot of pictures. Some photos we couldn't find the actual photographer who took the pictures. Some of them
Right?
surfaced after the book, but we worked everything out. But it was because some of these pictures are 30 years old. It was sometimes hard tracking them down. Don MD was very generous with his photo collection, along with some other folks that who helped us with the book,
Mhm.
using Bert Sumner, uh, and so we had a lot of help. People really got behind this book. The dirt track community is very uh, interested and very willing to help on this project once they saw what we're doing. Uh,
Sure.
so so this a tight
And
knit
they
group,
once again, everybody can buy the book at your website at motionpro.com.
right?
Okay. And yeah, I guess they could certainly get it for Christmas. And from my point of view, and I have a copy of the book right here, if whoever you are, if you're into any form of motorcycle racing, older bikes, vintage bikes, flat track, motocross, whatever it might be, the story of this and the development of the bike, especially for you guys who watch at home, I know you're into motocross bikes and works bikes, factory bikes. If you really, really want to get into something that shows you the development of something and the work that went behind it and how a lot of people came together to make this program work, this is an absolutely must-have book for you. It's not just for a flat track person, whether you're a street guy, a motocross guy, whatever it might be. It's just one of those great motorcycle stories that's really, really well told with some of the greatest interviews that you're ever going to read. And a lot of great pictures, too. I mean, War and Peace might be 1,200 pages, Chris, but Tolstoy, he doesn't have cool pictures like you have.
So, well, and I want to mention one other thing about the book. I know we've been going on quite a while.
Yeah.
But so many of the interviews dovetail with each other, and it was by one interview would back up somebody else's interview on the way
Mhm.
the chain of events of things, and it wasn't planned that way. We do an interview with someone, and then 6 months later, do an interview with somebody else, and they say, "Oh, by the way, such and such did this," and that something other we found we was in another previous interview from somebody else. So it really locked the story together, how it led credibility to the whole book if you read it page to page and remember some of the highlights of previous interviews.
Yeah.
It's to me it's really cool that it worked out that way. Um, but I just feel very fortunate we got it out there. As you mentioned, it'll be a great gift for somebody. I printed
Yeah.
1,000 copies, and that's it.
It is absolutely fabulous. And it's got a beautiful dust jacket on it, too, with some really great pictures on there as well. 560 pages, 700 pictures, over 60 interviews. This is not something you want to miss. When Honda Went Dirt Tracking by Chris Carter and Gerald Foster. Chris, I'm not going to let you get out of here just yet. I want to remind you that I'm going to be seeing you on November 6th at the Preston Petty Memorial Hopetown Reunion. And I understand you're going to be bringing some bikes down there too. What do you got first, Chris?
Well, I was fortunate to get to know Preston Petty, and in a roundabout way, I have his 1967 RS. Excuse me, not RS. I'm talking RS. His TM
Yeah.
HR 68 Suzuki Twin Port motocross bike. Um, I here again. I'm very fortunate. I got on those motorcycles a long time ago. I do have his bike. In fact, when we had our 30th anniversary, Joe, 8 years ago, almost 9 years
Yeah.
ago now, Preston was there. He hadn't seen the bike since the late 60s, and he was gracious enough to sign the gas tank and gave me a very nice note that went along with the bike. And
Yeah.
so I'm bringing that bike down. It should be fun for everyone to see it. And so it's just I'm looking forward to the Simi Valley event, and it should be a good time to visit. And I'm also going to be a judge, but I'm not going to judge my own motorcycle.
Oh, poor you. You know, that's really not something I envy anybody doing, and I don't like to do it when I go to a show either, is be a judge. Somebody always walks away a little disappointed, or there are other people that just don't understand because something shines like a mirror, it isn't necessarily correct. So
That's right. Yeah. We'll have a lot of fun.
but that's it. Once again, Chris Carter is my guest tonight. When Honda went dirt tracking, get over to the Motion Pro website. Get yours now for yourself or for a loved one, whoever loves motorcycles. Don't go away. I'm going to be back in just a moment to tell you a little bit more about what's happening on next week's show. But for right now, Chris, thank you so much for being my guest tonight. And good luck with the sale of the book. And we'll see you in Simi Valley on November 6th.
Thank you, Joe. Good night.
Good night. Okay, my guest tonight was Chris Carter, and it was really, really great speaking to him about his new book. In the meantime, I also want to thank another one of my sponsors who I didn't get to squeeze into the show tonight, Full Circle Racing Limited. For whatever motorcycle you might have, vintage motocross, on-road, off-road, adventure bike, get a hold of Tom McAllister at Full Circle Racing. We've got the York Swap Meet coming up on January 23rd. Racer X magazine on your newsstand now. One of the greatest publications there is. Covers all sorts of things. A lot of vintage. It's got some GP racing. It's got some tests. Got a little bit of everything over there at Racer X, International Motocross Museum. Get a hold of them. You can go to internationalmotocrossmuseum.org if you're looking for a shirt, a hat, or some posters, whatever it might be, at the International Motocross Museum. We are going to be doing more of these shows as we go on in the new year and even before that. I did speak with Gary Bailey the other day. We are going to have him on as a guest in the very, very near future. In fact, it might even be next Wednesday, as well as Martina Faltova-Cope. You know her dad, Jaroslav Falta. She also has a new book coming out, so we're going to be having her on the show as well. But in the meantime, this is Joe Abadi. I want to thank you for tuning in tonight, listening to my interview with Chris Carter. And yeah, let's see if, I don't know, Gio! See if he's going to come out. I don't know. He's behind closed doors. Things got to be extra quiet when I'm doing interviews. Even Susie isn't in here with me. But we'll find out if Gino is going to be able to make it out here. Gino! Oh, there you go, boy. There you go. Okay. Good night, everybody. Thanks for watching Vintage Motocross Q&A. Don't forget, keep sharing the show and go on the page tomorrow. We'll find out who won this beautiful sticker shoot compliments of Vmxq&A.